Several decades ago, I walked into the home of one of the most famous married couples in America. By the time that I left, I was almost certain that their marriage would not last. They didn't tell me that, they hadn't argued, nothing dramatic happened, but something inside that house told me the truth. And years later, that instinct turned out to be right. Back then, I was a newspaper reporter working for the Reno Gazette-Journal. One day I decided that they invited me to their home, so I went out there and I interviewed the duo, Captain and Tennille. You remember them. Oh, back in the 1975, they had a hit called Love Will Keep Us Together. That tune was everywhere. Radio, television, award shows, just about everywhere you tuned on television, and they were one of the most recognizable couples in pop music by far. And what I saw in their home didn't match the picture the world saw on television. And there was one small moment in that living room, the moment so subtle that people would have missed it, but it made me stop and think. This marriage would not last. I'll tell you the reason for that in a moment. But before we get into this, even before I arrived, even just as I arrived, the feeling, the setting in their home seemed surprisingly normal. It was no Hollywood mansion, no celebrity palace. Inside, there was a German shepherd that wandered through the living room. There were books everywhere, large windows looking out over the Nevada landscape. Calm, peaceful. Then I met them. First, Toni Tennille, warm, friendly, engaging, and but also she was kind of performing. Some celebrities have a switch, flip it on, and suddenly they're in a public mode. The polished version of themselves comes out, the staged version. And that, for Toni, had flipped on. It had flipped into the on mode. And boy, believe me, she was charming, professional, composed. Then there was Daryl Dragon, also known as the Captain, the man with the famous sailor hat, and that was a contrast between them. It was striking. Toni filled the room. Daryl almost disappeared in the room. He wasn't rude. He was not cold. He was not unpleasant, but he was quiet, very quiet, reflective, like he lived in a completely different emotional world than his wife, Toni Tennille. Now, and that contrast between them was the second thing that made me feel a bit uneasy, because the more I watched them interact, the more I began to notice a pattern. And it was striking, a pattern that would eventually explain everything that would happen in subsequent years. They sat together, the famous married couple, smiling and arms around each other, exactly the way the public expected them to look. Not hostile, not tense, just mismatched. Toni moved outward, Daryl moved inward. She talked easily. He retreated into a quiet mode of profound thought. At the time of the interview, the couple was preparing for something special, and they were about to renew their wedding vows in Virginia City, Nevada, just a short drive from the newspaper office where I worked. Oh, it's about a half-hour drive. And their renewal of their vows, they told me, was to be a small private gathering. Only close friends would be invited. And to the outside world, everything looked strong, solid. I had, by that point, interviewed many celebrities, and After that day, I would interview many more. And occasionally, journalists noticed something subtle, journalists such as myself. And what I noticed, there was a difference from the public image that this couple had and the private atmosphere that was in their living room. At one point, Darryl said something that stayed with me. He said the greatest wish in his life was simple. When he died, he said he hoped that one day people would say that he helped at least one person. That struck me. He wasn't talking about fame or success or even music. He was speaking inwardly, philosophically. Meanwhile, Toni carried on the conversation, confident, relaxed, comfortable in every way, as if she was in the spotlight with just this one single journalist there in their living room. Years passed, life moved on, and eventually the news came. The couple the world knew as Captain and Tennille divorced after nearly 40 years of marriage. And when the reason came out, it confirmed exactly what I had sensed sitting in their living room many, many years earlier. Communication, or rather, the lack of it. The naked truth I walked away from that day was simple. They lived in two complete different worlds, Toni outward, Darryl inward, one performing, one retreating. The marriages built on those foundations have different languages. Often, the couples in such situations drift apart. Take a look at this brief Entertainment Tonight television program clip featuring Toni Tennille. Now, this clip was produced about 10 years ago when Toni was 75 years old. She's now 85, and her husband, Darryl Dragon, also known as the Captain, perished from natural causes several years before she filmed this Entertainment Tonight interview. Find out what she says about the reasons that she divorced Darryl Dragon.
The Captain and Tennille. They were one of the biggest acts of the 70s.
Just stop, 'cause I really love you. Stop, I'll be thinking of you.
They had huge #1 hits and their own variety show on ABC.
Your show was bringing in 30 million viewers a week.
Yeah, at least. We split the pie with Little House on the Prairie and Rhoda. There were only 3 networks then.
A very young John Travolta made a guest appearance.
Right from the start, I gave you my heart. Whoa, I gave you my heart.
Look at how cute he is.
Now, legendary entertainer Toni Tennille is revealing that her life was not the perfect love story millions of fans imagined.
Musically, there was a great synergy, but romantically, it sounded like a nightmare.
Kind of was, because I just was this person constantly looking for something he couldn't give. And that part was wrong, but the music, we were right there together.
Today, Toni is, get ready for this, 75 years old. She still looks great.
And you still have the same haircut.
Vidal Sassoon.
Sassoon.
Yeah.
Her marriage to Darryl Dragon, otherwise known as the Captain, was fraught with problems from the beginning, she says.
What finally got us to marry was when our accountant said, you know, you could pay a lot less taxes if you were married. I mean, not me, I wanted to, but that was what said. Darryl said, okay.
Do that to me one more time. Once is never enough.
Their hit songs were all about love and romance. But in her new book, Toni Tennille, a memoir, Toni says behind the scenes it was another story.
There was not a lot of romance in this
No,
marriage.
there was no connection. To me, it should be an intimate, you know, deep, loving connection. That didn't happen.
Even with their problems, the marriage lasted 39 years. Toni says she finally decided to call it quits in 2014. Love, after all, did not keep them together.
You stayed in this marriage for almost 4 decades because of the fans?
That had very much to do with it. People thought we had this fairy tale relationship, and I knew that they would be disappointed.
The marriage may be over, but at least we still have the music.
Do that to me once again.
After hearing Tony explain what happened, everything made sense. She said the hardest part of marriage was that Daryl rarely communicated. He kept things inside, deep inside, and suddenly that quiet afternoon, decades earlier, comes back to me. The quiet man in the captain's hat, sitting beside a woman performing for the world. Two people speaking completely different emotional languages, trying to share the same thing. I liked them both. They were gracious, kind, generous with their home. When they welcomed this young reporter into their home. But sometimes journalism gives you something unexpected, a glimpse behind the curtain. And life, as it often does, added one more twist to their story. Years after their divorce, Daryl Dragon died of natural causes, and despite everything that happened between them, Tony Tennille was there with him when he died, which somehow brings their story full circle, because even when marriages end, the lives people were together don't simply disappear. They remain. The memories, the music, in moments. That day, so long ago in Washoe Valley, Nevada, I walked into the home of a famous couple, and I walked out of the home with something else, a quiet realization, the naked truth.